My dear friends, colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. I am Dr. Murlidhar Kanchi speaking from Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore, India. Today is another exciting day, the fifth day of the IACTA TE webinar. I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to the fifth day of the IACTA TE webinar. This webinar is being held in collaboration with ISQ, that is the International Society of Cardiac Ultrasound, IAE, that is the Indian Academy of Echocardiography, TSS, the Simulation Society, University of Minnesota, and is endorsed by EACTA, American Society of Echocardiography, and the Indian Association of Cardiothoracic Surgeons. I am also happy to announce that KMC has granted 3 credit points for this educational activity, and those who attended all the sessions will be given the credits through a certificate. I request the moderators to introduce the speaker and the topic and stick to the time schedule. And moderators are requested to lead the discussion in the QA session. Panelists are requested to contribute to discussion at the end of the talks. And I request speakers to stick to the 18-minute time slot. And attendees may please post their questions and comments on the chat box. And we will try to address all the questions at the end of the talks. The question answers will be dealt with at the end of the fifth talk. With this short introduction, I invite the moderators to take over and conduct the scientific program. I take great pleasure in introducing Dr. James Harmon of University of Minnesota, USA. He is the site director for general and vascular surgery and is extremely interested in acute critical care and islet pancreatic transplantation. I have seen him in many workshops to be an excellent, enthusiastic teacher, and we need to imbibe that quality from him. Dr. Rajan Anand is heading anesthesia at Sathya Hospital, Puttaparthi, and I welcome Rajan Anand. And may I request Dr. Harmon James and Dr. Rajan to take over the proceedings and conduct the scientific session. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having us. What a wonderful honor to participate in this fantastic webinar. And I've enjoyed the speakers already this morning. We look forward to the rest of the morning.
A very good evening to all. First and foremost, I would like to thank Murlidhar sir for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this unique academic feast. Dear faculty members, fellows, and my dear delegates, it gives me immense pleasure to invite the panelists for today's academic session. Dr. Uday Kanolkar, an interventional cardiologist with more than 3 decades of experience and currently working at Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore. Dr. Is there? Dr. Rakesh Gupta, a leading cardiologist with extensive experience in echocardiography. Sir is instrumental in getting our TE workshop endorsed with Indian Academy of Echocardiography. An extremely popular teacher, Sir is actively involved in running echo training courses since many years. Dr. Bhagirath Raghuraman, a well-known interventional cardiologist from Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore. Dr. Sandeep Mutha, a leading and well-experienced cardiac anesthesiologist from Pune. He is currently the treasurer of IACTA. Dr. Raj Shahjanand, a very good friend of mine, he is currently heading the Department of Cardiac Anesthesia and Critical Care at CMC Vellore. I welcome you all. So without taking much time, now I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Murli Krishna, an eminent cardiac anesthesiologist, currently working as senior consultant in the Department of Anesthesia and Critical Care at MGM Hospital. He will be speaking about the role of TEE in heart failure for LVAD and transplantation. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And for the next 20 minutes, I'll be briefly talking about what are the TEE implications for a case which is coming for an LVAD and heart transplant. The topic is very big per se, but I'll try to fit in the time that is allocated to me. So we'll look at it with this outline, look at an LVAD case, what are we going to look specifically in a pre-bypass period, what are we going to look in the post-bypass period. Same way for a transplant, what to look in a donor, what to look for a pre-bypass period, and what to look for a post-bypass for a recipient. Most of my talk, I'll confine myself to the transesophageal echo alone. I won't be dealing with the transthoracic echo related. So let us start with an LVAD case. And what are we going to look in the pre-bypass TE in an LVAD patient? So we will presume or we'll take it that all these patients who come for this, both the LVAD and the transplant patients, are the one who are well worked up, who are diagnosed, who went up through the entire process of the workup that takes us to the decision pathway, whether they're going for a VAD or a transplant, and finally they come to us. In a patient who has come for an LVAD in the pre-bypass TE, what we specifically need to look all these 4 parameters. One is, how is the right ventricular function? Are there any intracardiac shunts, that's either a PFO or any other shunts? How are the walls and how are the cannulation sites? Let us look one by one. Right ventricular function. As we all know, this is the most important thing that determines the outcome post-LVAD. And we get an idea of the right ventricular function right from the preoperative workup itself. But they can be changing the status, or they can be deterioration in the patient during the waiting period. And this is the one, the assessment of the right ventricular function is the one that decides whether this patient is going to go on a VAD alone, LVAD alone, or he needs some sort of support in the post-operative period, like a temporary RVAD or a BiVAD. So how do we assess the RV function in this patient? The RV function has to be assessed in total. You have to start looking from what is the structure of the RV, how is the shape of the RV, what are the dimensions. Look for the systolic function parameters, both the global and the regional assessment. Look for FAC, look for TAPSE, look for MPI, and look at the diastolic function parameters. Go for a tissue Doppler, strain assessment, and the hemodynamic parameters. Get the PA pressures, get the IVC, get the CVP. Though you get all those from your PA catheter, still get all those things from your RV echo, and then take a collective impression. How is your RV working? Is it a fair RV, good RV, or there's an element of significant RV dysfunction? I suggest all of you to please go through this document from the American Society of Echocardiography regarding the guidelines or how to assess a right ventricular function. We have to do probably all of this, what is mentioned there, in a given case of LVAD in the pre-bypass period. There have been a lot of studies which have looked into the various echo parameters in this VAD patients, LVAD patients in the pre-bypass period or in the pre-operative period, to identify what are the parameters, or maybe a single or a couple of factors which have been consistently associated with the post-operative RV failure, so that we can distribute, we can identify the one who are the sicker subsets. But that has not been very successful. But mostly in most of the studies, what has been commonly associated with post-operative failure is when you have an RV longitudinal strain of less than 9.6%, where there is a significant dysfunction. At the same time, the RV to LV and diastolic diameter is more than 0.75. That simply implies that an RV which is dilated, which is globular, and it is not contracting well, is RV that is going to trouble in the post-operative period. Having looked into all these, your final assessment about the RV is an aggregate assessment that is utilizing all the things you have in hand. That is the left side parameters. How is your LVDP? How is your LA pressure? How are your pulmonary artery pressures? And the right-sided parameters, both echo and clinical based. Based on all these things, you take an optimal approach, and then you categorize your RV as a normal RV or a fair function, or an element of significant RV dysfunction. So let us look at the second thing, what we need to see in these patients. We need to actively look for whether there are any intracardiac shunts in these patients. More common is a PFO or ASD, or there can be an element of VSR in a patients who are coming for an ischemic cardiomyopathy, coming for a LVAD. So what will happen if we miss them? What happens is post-LVAD, both the LV EDP and the LA pressures comes down. So that leads to a significant right to left shunt. And this leads to desaturation in the post-operative period. Rather, even after checking in the pre-bypass period also, at times it may happen that we may miss it out. So post-bypass also, we are supposed to check. Plus, if we have something like unexplained desaturation in the post-operative period in a VAD, we have to actively look whether there are any shunts. Ideally, we are supposed to do a saline contrast study in all the patients to document that the intra-atrial septum is intact. Then we have to look for all the walls. To start with the mitral wall, if the patient is having a mitral stenosis, the main issue with that is the LVAD inflow will be limited. So this has to be corrected simultaneously as you are inserting the mitral wall. If the patient has a mitral regurgitation, anything more than moderate, we need to look at it. But still, there is a good chance that the degree of mitral regurgitation comes down post-VAD implantation, because VAD itself leads to an LV unloading, and that leads to a better coaptation of your wall. If there are some other pathological conditions that are causing the mitral regurgitation, that needs to be looked into and has to be communicated to the surgeon, probably has to be addressed simultaneously as you're doing the VAD. The most important thing from the valvular point of view is aortic regurgitation. What happens is when these patients who are having an aortic regurgitation, the blood flows from the ventricle cavity, VAD, aorta, and then through the leaky aortic valve, it just comes back to the ventricular cavity. So this forms a blind loop and blood just keeps circulating there, thereby diminishing the forward flow that goes to the body. So a thorough assessment of the AR has to be done, even if it is a mild degree. You have to look for what is the reason of it. This has to be communicated with the surgeon. This has to be discussed and take a call whether we are going to repair it or anything needs to be done, or if the valve is significantly bad, then consider replacement. The other valvular lesion is the aortic stenosis. This per se doesn't have any major impact because you're going to bypass the aortic wall. But what is a concern here is in patients, if they have during the follow-up time in the post-operative or in the long-term follow-up, if the patient develops a sudden pump thrombosis, if the patient has aortic stenosis also, there won't be any forward flow because the LVAD has stopped working and the aortic valve is stenotic. So there won't be any forward flow. There won't be that safety factor. So we have to replace the valve. Ideal is to replace it with a bioprosthetic valve. Tricuspid regurgitation, we see in good number of them, probably an indicator of an RV dysfunction. And if it is moderate to severe, if the annulus is dilated, then it has to be planned to undergo a repair simultaneously. So after looking at the walls, what we need to look at is the cannulation sites. We have to look at the chamber where we're going to cannulate. Mostly that is the left ventricle. Look at the size of the cavity, more so in the patients if they're having a restrictive cardiomyopathy kind of picture where the cavity is good enough to accommodate the ventricular inflow cannula. Then look at whether there are any thrombi. Most of these DCMs with severe ventricular dysfunction, they have thrombus in the ventricle, mostly near the apex. If there are thrombi, notify the surgeon. Probably they need to take it out when they are doing the coring, or they have to plan for an alternation cannulation sites. Same way, an aneurysmal and thinned out wall may not hold the inflow cannula there. Plus, when the surgeon is going to plan the coring of the apex, where they're going to put the inflow cannula, what they usually do is they just lift the heart and then try to put a finger there and poke the apex of the heart. We can, under T guidance, we can see whether the site is appropriate in terms there is no clot there, there are no chordae or papillary muscles obstructing, and the orientation at that point, if the cannula is put there, is well within the mitral wall, the orientation is good. So that also has to be done for the mitral inflow cannula, looking at it from the echo. So then we have to look at the aortic sites to see whether there are any athromas at the point where they're planning to put the outflow graft. So those are the things what we look in the pre-bypass period. Coming to post-bypass period, these are the things which we need to specifically look at. Look for a de-airing, look for any RV function in the post-bypass period. How is the inflow cannula? How is the outflow graft? Optimizing the pump speed. And lastly, a couple of things, how to handle and how to identify a suction event and what to do in case you have a trouble. So to start with de-airing, as we know, they open up the LV fully to put the inflow cannula. So that's an open chamber and it has to be thoroughly de-aired because any air that goes into the RCA will cause RV dysfunction and that leads to significant problems in the post-operative period. So a thorough TE-guided de-airing has to be done in this patient. Same way as we discussed before, we have to reassess for any PFO or ASD even though we have done in the pre-bypass period. And again, go and look for if there is any aortic regurgitation that has appeared de novo. Then RV dysfunction, we have assessed it even pre-bypass also. Again, we have to thoroughly assess it in the post-bypass because there can be factors that can deteriorate the RV function like air embolism as we have seen before, volume overload or bypass or clamp related or pulmonary hypertension related. So reassess the RV function and go by the regular echo guidance while you're coming off, see that the RV function is at least fair to good and make a choice if you're inotropes or mechanical support depending upon the situation. Then visualize the inflow cannula, look at the position of the cannula, see that there is an uninterrupted smooth flow from the mitral to the cannula inflow, put a Doppler and see how is the flow through the cannula and make sure that there is no contact with the intraventricular septum, chordae, papillary muscles or any other part of the mitral apparatus. This is a 3D image of the inflow cannula, which is well within the LV cavity away from all the structures in the LV cavity. That is a Doppler interrogation, which shows that there is a smooth flow through the aortic LVAD inflow cannula. Same way, the outflow graft has to be assessed. The proximal part of the graft that is attached to the LVAD pump may be difficult to image, but whereas the distal and the middle part, we can image them. The part where it is opening to the aorta, usually we can get it in the upper esophageal views. It has to typically show a laminar flow, which is unidirectional and which has a systolic augmentation. So as we see here on the left side of the image, we see the middle part of the outflow graft. On the right side, you see the distal part of the outflow graft, which is opening into the ascending aorta. The same is the 3D images. You see both the middle part and the distal part opening into the ascending aorta. This image shows the Doppler integration of the outflow graft into the aorta that shows a smooth flow, which is having systolic augmentation. So after this, what we need to do in the post-bypass period, probably at regular repeated intervals and even in the post-operative period, is optimization of the pump parameters. The optimization of pump parameters is guided by the echo, and we look at 5 things to see what are the optimal pump parameters. One is how is the left ventricular filling, what is the interventricular position septum, how is the aortic valve opening, how is the right ventricular function, and how is the right ventricular volume. So based on this, we target something on echo to decide the target of what is an optimal RPM. What is our target is we should have an adequate right ventricular filling and a left ventricular filling. The interventricular septum should be to the right. The aortic valve should be opening intermittently. That is what we target. And the RPM with that RPM that should have a good flows from the LVAD. We see here at a 2000 RPM, the interventricular septum is midline or to the right, and the aortic valve is opening. As we increase the RPM, the septum starts getting more and more midline. The aortic valve stops opening with every beat. And if we increase further, the septum totally shifts to the right and the aortic valve stops opening. So we decrease from here and come to a point where septum is to the right side and the aortic valve opens once in at least 2 to 3 beats. Then the other thing which we need to know in the LVAD patients is that there is something called a suction event. What happens is with the sucking power of the LVAD, the left ventricle collapses on the LVAD inflow cannula, thereby leading to a total LVAD inflow occlusion and thereby leading to no flows or low flows. This can happen secondary to multiple reasons. They can be in a hypovolemia that can cause this, or your VAD flows are quite excessive that it just sucks out the LV that can cause this. A pericardial tamponade or a pericardial effusion can cause this, or a severe right ventricular dysfunction, either primary or secondary to PAH also can cause this. This typically presents as a low pressure and a low flow alarm. It is diagnosed by echo, put an echo probe, you can identify it. And this needs to be addressed immediately because this is life-threatening. We have to decrease the RPM and we have to identify what is the cause. We have to go and address it. This is how a suction event typically presents. The LV, even the upper part is open here. But in a typical suction, the entire LV just collapses. The septum totally shifts to the left side and there won't be any flows from the LVAD. Then finally, the troubleshooting of the patients who are having LVAD. The main issue with the LVAD in the post-operative period, that is either in the post-bypass or in the immediate post-operative period in your intensive care unit, is these patients have a non-pulse style BP. Your NABP measurements are unreliable. Your pulse oximeter doesn't show anything. The flows that are displayed on the LVAD monitor are not the accurate ones. They're all measured flows. They're not the calculated flows. I mean, they're calculated flows. They're not the measured flows. So what the monitor shows may not be a correct one. If your patient has a sudden deterioration, if you want to go and troubleshoot it, whether it's a hypovolemic shock or a cardiogenic shock, or you're looking at a septic shock or some other thing like a pericardial effusion, what helps you most is by doing an echo. So echo has the most important role in troubleshooting any hemodynamic disturbances in a VAD. In case in any situation it happens that you can get a good transthoracic images, please don't hesitate, put a TA probe and then start troubleshooting it. So that's about the VAD. We'll briefly deal about what are the team we need to look for a case of a heart transplant. So this we will look at what to do for a donor, what to look in a recipient pre-bypass, what to look in a recipient post-bypass. The donor, the echo is the most important parameters that decide us whether this particular organ is usable or not. Most often we get a suboptimal transthoracic windows in the donor. This is because all of them are mechanically ventilated. They have chest injuries. Most of them have fluid overload by the time we see. And you can turn the donor to the left lateral position to get a better windows. It may not be possible. So transesophageal echo is preferred and safe. And that is what we use by default in our institute for all the donors. We have to do a thorough assessment of the structure of the heart and function of all the valves. Look at both biventricular function, especially assess the RV, whether this RV can take the PA pressure of the recipient. Look at the left ventricular septum. Any septal thickness of more than 14 millimeters is considered as a relative contraindication according to ISHLT guidelines. Look for RWMA. That gives you a hint whether you're dealing a donor who is having a coronary artery disease. Same way, do a calculation of the cardiac mass and the PA pressures. So based on that PA pressures and the calculation of cardiac mass, you can go and choose a suitability of a recipient between a donor, whether this particular donor heart can go and work in the recipient who is having higher BSA or who is having a higher PA pressure. So you can take a call based upon these parameters. Same way, if you're looking at a pediatric recipient, there the size of the heart and the size of the great vessels matters. So in pediatric recipient, we measure the size of the heart and compare it with that of the recipient, and you take the size of the great vessels and you communicate it back to the team there to see what is a mismatch. They'll be prepared for handling the mismatches. lot of times we see, especially the young donors who are in the 20s, having a severe ventricular dysfunction when we put the T probe. This can be due to the stress or the more common usage of the high dose constrictors, vasopressin and noradrenaline, or it can be due to the brain death physiology per se. We try to optimize them. You go for a hormonal resuscitation, you cut down your vasoconstrictors, you start some inotropes, you keep reassessing them every 1 hour, probably even in the intraoperative period also. Then finally, you take a decision whether you can use the organ or not. If the function improves, ejection fraction of more than 40%, that organ can be usable. If the EF remains less than 40%, then you take a collective call depending upon what is the donor's age, what is the donor status, what is your recipient age, how sick is your recipient. Based upon all this, you take a call whether you're going to use the organ or not. So this is a case in the when we initially saw it was showing severe ventricular dysfunction. We started some dobutamine. After starting dobutamine, as we can see, the heart has improved and we went ahead and used the heart. On the contrary, this is also in a young man. To start with, the heart was very bad. We started inotropes, we escalated, we cut down constrictors, but finally that didn't make. The heart goes for a stunning, where the heart will be as bad or maybe worse than a recipient's heart. So these organs, usually we won't take them. So in the recipient, we'll come to the recipient, what to look for them specifically in the pre-bypass period. Most commonly, they're well worked up in the pre-operative period and they'll come to you. You just do an echo to just confirm the diagnosis, how sick the things are. Look for clots specifically. More so, the echo role comes in a congenital heart disease patient or any complex congenital heart disease patient who comes for a surgery. More so, the patients who come through the univentricular pathway, the Glenn and the Fontans who come for transplant. There you may have to do a detailed TE, look for all the vessel sizes, see the orientation, and do a planning with the surgeon. These all would have been done well ahead in the pre-operative period itself, but still, it's good to do an assessment and again discuss in the pre-bypass period. So that just it shows a severe biventricular dysfunction with spontaneous echo contrast in both the ventricles. Then a clot in the LV. So what are we going to look in the recipient in the post-bypass period? Post-bypass, we have to do a thorough echo to see how the graft function is, to make sure that both the ventricle functions are good, to make sure your hemodynamics are stable. Let us look at the common issues what we face in the post-bypass period. One most common thing what we see in the post-bypass period is the right ventricular dysfunction of the graft. This can be either a primary graft dysfunction of the heart itself, leading to right ventricular dysfunction, or secondary to the pulmonary artery hypertension. Whatever it is, we have to do a thorough right ventricular assessment. Then you start your 1-by-1 measure. You optimize your inotropes, choose inodilators, go for nitric oxide. Then if nothing works, if your RV still remains bad, go for a mechanical assist device. These kind of patients, your TE continuously has to be monitored after chest closure, just before shifting in the post-operative period at regular intervals to make sure you catch them on the right time before they deteriorate further. This is a heart which shows a normal biventricular function after coming off. This is a heart where we had a severe right ventricular dysfunction and was stable in the theater, but after a few hours shifting down to the ICU, he started deteriorating. We went ahead and put him on ECMO. This is the echo after around close to 10 days on the ECMO support. Heart right ventricle recovered well and we took off the ECMO support for him. Then we look at the anastomotic gradients across all the great vessels, because anastomotic gradients can happen, and more so in the pediatric patients, and when they happen, they lead to secondary ventricular dysfunctions. This view shows us how the aortic anastomosis is smooth, the flow is laminar without any turbulence. This shows the pulmonary anastomosis, which is again smooth. SVC image from a bicaval view shows some turbulence here. In this case, you measure the pressure both in the RA and the higher SVC, then discuss the surgeon. If there is a significant gradient, then the surgeon may have to go ahead and redo the anastomosis of the SVC. Same way, this is the IVC anastomosis. So other things which you see, look for left ventricular dysfunction, which is again common, maybe because of the long clamp times or per se the donor ventricular dysfunction or a primary graft dysfunction. There are secondary causes. You identify and you keep supporting the heart till that time. Dearing has to be thorough in the transplant just before we coming off. We may see a de novo tricuspid regurgitation. If it is mild, that's fine. If it is more than 3+, probably we may need to consider whether that needs a repair. And optimizing the hemodynamics is totally TE guided in the post-operative period in these patients. In the post-operative, that is, you're handling the patients in the ICU, we have a poor transthoracic images typically for the first 1 or 2 days in these patients, because the donor heart, which is small in size and normal, whereas the recipient pericardial cavity is a huge one. So you have a lot of air and that precludes us getting any transthoracic echo image. If you have any hemodynamic instability, TE is useful. Without hesitation, we should put it and start working on it. And we should start troubleshooting what is the issue, whether dealing a ventricular function, RV or an LV issue, or you're doing a pulmonary artery hypertension, or that is an early sign of rejection, and need to work on optimizing inotropes and take a call about the decision of mechanical circulatory support. So to conclude, TEE plays a major role in heart failure patients coming both for a transplant and VAD. In VAD, what matters most is your right ventricular function and optimization of parameters, which has to be done at frequent intervals in the immediate post-operative period. Same way for the transplant, the donor's assessment is quite vital to take a call whether the particular donor usable and suitable for the particular recipient. The post-operative issues, what we see more frequently is the right ventricular dysfunction and PAH, again, where TEE is useful for them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a very lucid presentation. Now I request James Harman, sir, to introduce Dr. Deepak Tente.
I just really appreciate that presentation. What a very thorough, comprehensive, easily understood, and focusing on removal of clot at the inflow and then salvage with ECMO, usage of the nitric oxide. These are all really important features that you've reviewed, and I thank you so much. I'm sure the audience has appreciated this. Now, I don't see questions from the audience at this point, but let me see if I can help me out on finding these questions.
Thank you.
We covered questions in the session, sir.
So the question answer will be at the end of all the lectures today. Thank you.
Harman, the question answer is at the end of all the talks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.